Hello, everyone. In particular, the Lionel Pride. This is your Chancellor, Martin Rooney, and our other host, Nick Barringer, Chief Academic Officer. And if you did not see the first of our Roar sessions, maybe you want to go back to it because it was kind of our superhero origin story, if you will. You got to hear how we got to here, what have we done in our careers, how we've used the science that we've learned. The people that watched it, there was one thing that people asked about most. They kept saying, tell us more about that fighting stuff. Wait a minute. You guys are working. You guys are both working with the winningest fighter with the most fights in UFC history. Tell me more. And today we are going to do that. We're going to always breach the gap and show how we are using the current technology and science in our field of exercise science to help this fighter. Hey, I'm going to hand it off to Nick, see if he's got any ideas to start off with, and then we're going to get rolling with our half hour of Lionel Power.
Thank you, Martin. I'm excited about this episode because I get to ask Martin a bunch of questions. For those that don't know, but we're about to find out, Martin has been the sport of mixed martial arts or been around it probably going close to 30 years? Close to pre-UFC, which we're going to hear about. But I want to hear, Martin, tell him, how did you get involved in this thing called mixed martial art? Or back then it was called cage fighting or no holds barred even?
I'll tell you what it was called. And hey, you froze me there almost with the 30 years, which for everybody listening, that just makes me feel really old, where I was like, I feel like it was last week. And yes, so I have a very interesting story in, if we want to call it, mixed martial arts. And I have been very lucky to have been around the sport for almost its entirety. So here's the quick story. If you listen back on episode 1 of the Roar sessions, I was on the US bobsled team. And one of my roommates was a professional fighter. He actually got money for our sled through fighting in Japan. He was in the first ever MMA documentary called Choke. And this got me really interested in it because I was watching him training. I was watching what was going on. When my bobsled dream was over, I went back home to New Jersey. And a funny story, I don't even know if Nick knows this. My buddy says, hey, man, I bet I can beat you up now. And I'm coming off the bobsled team. I'm about 215, super strong, super fast. And we went into his backyard. And guess what happened? He beat me up. I'm like, man, my face is scratched up. I'm torn up. I'm breathing heavy. I'm half dead in his backyard, rolling around on like tree roots. I won't forget it. And I said, what's going on? And he goes, oh man, ever see that Gracie stuff? Those things from the UFC? Well, one of those guys moved from Brazil and I've been going. And I said, man, if you're learning this stuff and you're doing good at it, I'm going and learning this stuff. And man, that week, for the first time, I went to Renzo Gracie's in New York City. This is like 1997, 98. And it was in its total beginnings. The first guy I ever trained with was Matt Serra, who went on to win the UFC title, which is pretty insane. I got my head torn off so many times I couldn't turn it to the left or right. And I just kept going back. And one thing, hey, it was this golden age. Everybody was just learning it. It was brand new. But there was something that happened that had Renzo take a very special interest in me. And what it was is one day he was showing a move. Everybody practices the moves and then everybody rolls. And when he was showing the move, this guy, I kept just bench pressing him off of me and the move wasn't working. So Renzo came over and I actually pushed him too, but then he whispered down in my ear and he goes, hey, champ, just let the move work and let's move on here. Choked me out. And after, he came up to me and he said, hey, what do you do? Why, how are you so strong? He kept calling me the strong one. Everybody had a nickname. It was that guy. And I just told him I do a lot of training. I'm an orthopedic therapist. These are what my degrees are in. I'm fresh off the bobsled team. And he was such a visionary. He knew at that time in the sport, now that the Gracies were going to be spreading their family legacy and the new techniques and the style of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, he knew, holy cow, there's going to be more guys like this guy. And when this guy learns this stuff, this was like the Mark Kerrs and the Mark Colemans and all these monsters that were entering the sport. He knew, man, they've got to get stronger too. And he said, hey, how about you train me and my family, my fighters, for strength and conditioning, travel the world, go on the greatest adventures, and we'll train you in jiu-jitsu too. What do you say? And man, I was looking for something in my life and I said, absolutely. And that led all those years later, almost 30, I guess, yeah, we're at like 27 years. Man, I've learned so much, made so many mistakes, but it led to the greatest adventures and experiences of my life. For the students, just to hear that. The first thing is maybe some lessons here to tease out. First thing is, I always say, whether it's a seminar, whether it's going somewhere, you got to show up and you got to be in the room, right? So the first thing was I had the courage to show up and be in the room. That's the only way they meet me. Hey, I was given a really good effort and they noticed something about me. But the biggest part of that whole story was I got an opportunity, and there are opportunities every day, and I said yes to it, right? So Henzo said, "Do you want to do this?" And I said, "Yes." I believe most people would say no. They would say, "No, I don't know what I'm doing," or "No, it's something I'm not familiar with," or "It's not something I know all the way about." And I'm challenging all the students, "Hey guys, you got to be in the room, and when the opportunity arises, you got to say yes." So that's the first part of the story right there.
No, that's great stuff. I mean, to land in Henzo Gracie's dojo at
Yeah.
that time with those characters, it's remarkable.
That's what I always say is there was nothing special about me. I was just very lucky, right? I was in the right place at the right time. I was the right age. I had this fitness level right at that right time. If any of those aren't true, right? If I'm born 10 years later or 10 years earlier, if Henzo doesn't go there, if I don't move back there, there were so many cosmic things that led to that.
Yeah. But, I think the lesson, we talk about fitness and talk about being in shape. What is it? You don't have to get ready if you stay ready, and you're already ready, staying fit. So, talking about that, you did strength and conditioning with these athletes, with these mixed martial artists. Can you talk about how you started out, how you trained them, and then kind of how that's evolved? Because there's been a lot of research and changes in the exercise science field in 27 years. How has that evolved as you went forward?
Well, the first thing I will say, there's an old line I use a lot. I'm a black belt in judo. A black belt is not the person that makes no mistakes. It's the person that made them all. They just don't make them anymore. And I feel like I have my black belt now in training an MMA fighter, but I had to make a lot of mistakes. Now, remember, we're going back. I was flying with the Gracie family to Pride in Japan at that time. Some of those fights were still unlimited time frame. So I always say that because imagine I tell you, hey, you got to prepare this athlete for this event. They need speed, strength, and power, and they might need it indefinitely for like 5, 6, 7 hours. How do you train for that? And remember, I was a speed and strength athlete, a Division I college track athlete. I understood training, but I didn't yet understand the specific demands of the sport. That's why I train so much in jiu-jitsu. I'm a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. That is why I trained in it so I could understand the demands so I could better train the guys. I don't think I ever had a real vision of being a MMA fighter. I competed in judo and jiu-jitsu and grappling. But that being said, in the beginning, I definitely overdid it. I think my training was too much metabolic based. My training was way too long. We were creating circuits that were like an hour long after we would do an hour warm up. I think another big mistake was I fell into this trap that I think a lot of coaches, trainers do, and they try to make what they're doing look exactly like the sport itself. So I started to create isometric activities that now we're just like holding chokes, as if I'm holding a guillotine. I'm creating all of these things for the exact positions that they would be in and then try to create strength there where not that that per se is wrong. It's just they were already doing that. Right. So I think one of the big lessons is they were already doing their metabolic training in their actual jujitsu or their sparring or their boxing, Muay Thai, and they were actually doing a lot of those specific movements. So I started to take more of a general approach, around the time, when, man, we had this room of guys, it was unreal from Hodger Gracie, who is arguably one of, if not the best jiu-jitsu players ever, to Frankie Edgar, who goes on to win the UFC title. And we'll fast forward to Jim Miller, who has most fights, most wins. These guys were all in there and they're training so hard. I realized I just needed to get them way stronger. Like if they were way stronger and then they could take that to what they were doing, they'd probably have the best opportunity and I wouldn't be wearing them out. But that was the beginnings of how we were doing everything
So you took an approach where you tried to make it look more like the fight, right? And then over time you learned, well, no, it kind of comes back to those basic strength training principles that our students are learning in their, their basic exercise science, their personal training classes.
Yeah. Well, and and for everybody listening too, it's not just me. Nick is like, it's not that Nick doesn't know. Nick has trained, but also Nick and I both are the coaches for Jim Miller, who has the most fights, most wins in UFC history, fourth most Octagon time ever at 7.5 hours. Imagine being in the cage for 7.5 hours. He's got the most submission attempts ever. He's second most in submissions, second most in finishes. So incredible career. But here's what I would say the reverse. Yes, we took a general approach, maybe say with the strength. There was always still metabolic work, mobility. You had to know everything. But guys, nutrition, I had to really lean into nutrition in a big way. That's how Nick is involved. We had to recovery in the beginning, that wasn't even a word that anybody was really talking about. Nutrition really wasn't on the forefront either. So I think, meaning sleep and the wearables and the technology that we have now. Jim, why I'm wearing this gear. This is the gear I just wore last week when Jim fought at UFC 314 in Miami, where it's so crazy because I'm looking on my shelf and I have the Fight of the Night trophy from UFC 33, just to put it in perspective. So I think that's 25 years gap in between the two of them. But what I would say, Nick, is, hey, from having worked with Jim over the last bunch of years and Jim being older now, what would you say on the kind of sleep part, longevity part, anything? What are your biggest breakthroughs?
Yeah, I think the biggest breakthrough with him when we first kind of started working together was the sleep component. So, like you alluded to, we did the wearable, which I have on. I've got my Aura Ray, with the sensors, so I can track sleep. So that was the first thing I think we had him get within meeting him and connecting him with him. And what we could see was, I think he's averaging like 5 or 6 hours a night, which for an athlete is unacceptable. For a student, if you're listening to this and you're only getting 5 or 6 hours
unacceptable.
Unacceptable. So we progressed and we started shooting for 7 and 8. And I think now, sometimes during fight week, we'll see like up to 9 hours. And athletes need that, right? If you're beating up your body, you're doing this hard training, you're doing all these skill sets, you're doing Muay Thai, you're doing grappling, and then you're doing the conditioning and strength conditioning, the wrestling, the boxing, all of that takes a toll on your body. So you're going to need that sleep to recover. And what we've seen from the data tracking is when you get more sleep, you feel better, you recover, you're able to perform better. So I would say that was the biggest initial change outside of just looking at the nutrition.
Yeah. And I can agree with that. It wasn't that we ever thought sleep wasn't important. I think by Jim actually seeing what he was getting, but then the tool actually, and we all wear it, I wear it as well. The tool actually forces you to be more accountable because you're measuring it, right? Like, wow, now that I'm measuring it, man, I need to get more sleep. I need to get a better score. And I would challenge everybody to that. If you are going to work with people in the future, it can't just be measuring the bench press or how many reps they did on a curl. Man, the more things you can get them to understand how to measure, it actually enhances the importance and then improves that too. But I'll say this, a lot of people, Nick, and I know Nick has done a lot here. So many people will write in and say, are you worried about CTE, or what about head injuries, or are you worried about this, or should this fighter keep going? Because guys, Jim has had 46 fights in the UFC. His plan is to have 50. To put that in perspective, of 46, most fighters would never fight 3 times in a year. Most fighters will never get 15 years of fighting. You'd have to fight 3 times a year for 15 straight years to get 45 fights. Jim has 46, which is, incredible. Nick, maybe talk about the creatine and some of the stuff that you've seen, the omegas as well, and some of the stuff that we are doing to make sure we're preventing those problems.
So for my background being military, that was something that we looked at quite extensively. So with blasts and with the overpressure, anytime you have an explosion, you cause this pressure in the air, it's been shown to cause damage. In the military too, rough parachute landing, we do combatives, you had head injuries. So I've been researching that for quite some time. And so it kind of transitioned really nicely into combat sports and to those same practices for brain health used in the military is going to benefit mixed martial artists, right? And one of which I'll start with is the omega-3 fatty acids. About 60% of your brain is docosahexaenoic acid. So that's that DHA of that, EPA and DHA you see when you flip over a fish oil. And what research has shown, there's one big researcher in the military, Dr. Mike Lewis, has shown time and time again that when we're able to get more omega-3 fatty acids in an individual, they're able to recover more quickly and able to preserve some of that cognitive function. So that's one of the things with Jim is not only is he taking omega-3 fatty acids regularly before he goes into a fight, but we actually have a protocol after a head injury where you go really high dose. You might go 8 grams for a week, then 6 grams for a week, then 4 grams for a week, and then back to that 2 grams that you kind of want to hang out at. But what that's going to allow you to do is allowing that brain to recover because it's giving it more of that fat that's basically the brain's comprised of, so it can recover more quickly, just like eating protein right after a training session is going to help that muscle recover. And then the other one is creatine. Creatine is, at one point it was think for power and strength. I think, Martin, you were talking about how they gave that to you when you were at the Olympic Center, right? They're using it for strength and power. Now we're seeing there's a lot of things with cognition because it can pass the blood-brain barrier. So it actually go through the blood-brain barrier and be used as an energy source. And so higher doses of creatine, even 20, 30 grams after a head injury can help that athlete recover. Our brain runs off of glucose. So all Lionel students should know that in your nutrition course, right? That's the primary fuel source. Well, whenever we get some sort of impact, it can disrupt that glucose that's being sent to the brain. So if the brain doesn't get fuel, the brain can't recover. Creatine can pass the blood-brain barrier and be used as a fuel source when that glucose is interrupted. So that's another great reason to get some creatine monohydrate in your diet after a head injury.
Man. Well, and for everybody listening, in particular the students, maybe what you thought at first was, oh man, these guys are doing stuff with fighters and man, tell us how hardcore is it or how crazy is the training or are these guys tough? And I think the reminder always is behind every athlete that you see, at least, and I would hope every successful one, you're going to find, if you dig enough, some coaches that know what they're doing using the most current either research, literature, data in exercise science. And that's what we want to inspire you about what these calls are. Like Nick and I would both agree, if we did not have that background and we weren't always researching new ideas to apply, man, we'd still be doing it the old way. So imagine the reverse. Imagine and I still see it today, killing somebody with a metabolic session, then after that, starving them or something, then not letting them get the right amount of protein, then them getting beat up in sparring and actually hurt and can't fight, or beat up in sparring, maybe suffer a head injury and do nothing to take care of that. Probably still does happen today too. And that's the exciting part, maybe for every student listening, is we're never done. There's always, I think, maybe there's no best, but there's always better, right? There's always a better way to continue to figure things out. And we're always evolving down to maybe the last part, because hopefully you're saying, wow, nutrition plays a big role. Whoa, recovery plays a big role. Wow, the actual training plays a big role. Well, another part, when we dive into a little bit with the nutrition or diet, a big thing that happens every week that nobody knows about that I got thrown into the fire on was the weight cutting. And I had done it wrong probably when I wrestled. You throw on a sauna suit and try to get into the hottest environment you can, and I don't know, just lose weight or starve yourself, or just take no water in, or just be like spitting in a jar, like just things that this is what people did. Number one, it was very dangerous. Over the 25 years, I've unlocked at least the safest way to do it. I wish we didn't have to do it. I wish fighters didn't do it, but I don't think we're going to remove that from the sport. And as a result, because I cared so much about the people I was working with, I tried to figure out and use everything in the current literature, either the safest ways to do it, the best ways to do it, the best ways that would not impact performance negatively, and the best ways to rehydrate after the performance too.
Yeah. So, at one point, and Mark can attest to this through history, you'd have fighters cutting large amounts of weights. And there's still some fighters out there that do that, because the thing is, if you can enter that cage 10, 20 pounds bigger than the other fighter, that is an advantage, right? You have more mass on them. But there was some research, and I think it was out of Australia, that looked at actually outcomes and how much fighters cut. And what the researchers found was once you got past 8% of body weight, once you like 10% or more, those fighters tended to lose more because you only have 24 hours to recover, which might seem like a lot, but if you're cutting a lot of weight, it's hard to get that back into all the cells, especially, think about your brain within that 24-hour period. So that 8% kind of seems to be the sweet spot. And so that's what we target now. And especially as an athlete gets older, it's going to be hard to cut more weight, right? And you also have to look at body composition. Muscle, mostly water. Fat, not a lot of water in fat. So somebody with a lower percent body fat can actually cut more weight than somebody with a higher percent body fat, just because there's not really a lot of water in fat, but there's a lot of water in muscle. So knowing these sort of things when you approach it like a science, and, seeing Martin at work here, I've never seen anybody keep more meticulous notes. Martin, you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, from the day coming into fight week, what Jim was, last fight before.
I know it for 20 fights in a row. And I call it like Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs, right? A roadmap. Where we've been very lucky. And for everybody listening, what makes this experience very unique is most fighters never fight many times and have very long to go. So Jim has given us so much rich data. From Nick has seen his Aura Ring data the week of the fight and how it changes and how sleep changes as you become a little more dehydrated, all the way to I just know exactly where he needs to be almost every minute of the 4 or 5 days leading up to the fight to make sure we make weight safely. He feels good. We definitely changed in so many ways how we do it. And, Nick and I know we actually are looking at some other things now too, even just from this last one, always trying to get better. But maybe the lesson there, if you have no experience with this stuff, don't go try to either lose 20 pounds in a day or help somebody do that. Man, you better know what you're doing, because never forget how dangerous it is. I always worry about this sport because there are people that still go so drastic. Jim had a fight once, and the other guy went into kidney failure on the scale and couldn't fight because he had tried to cut too much weight or cut it wrong. Super, super dangerous. So I just want to make sure we hear that. But if you know the science and have a lot of experience, the athlete understanding it too. Like, let's put it this way. Jim knows what he is also doing, having done it 46 times, and that's just in the UFC. But ultimately, it is something that I want everybody to understand. You should always be collecting data, always collecting data on yourself, because over time, when you can look back, it tells you all the trends, right? Like when I was training, I had all my numbers on everything, whether I was competing in powerlifting or when I was trying to run as fast as I could run. And by having all that data to look back on makes it easier and to coach forward, right? So, and again, why we're saying all these things is I just love the concept, because sometimes it's easy to forget how much the actual science and the education that you are gaining and that you are getting now will come back to help you later, right? Like every bit of it, I could never turn my back on my degrees because I wouldn't be able to learn. I wouldn't understand how to study. I wouldn't understand how to research, not just what the current stuff is, but just even finding it, right? And applying it. So, but what we tried to use today was a vehicle of MMA just as one sport. Now imagine if you're interested in football, or you're interested in soccer, or you're interested in baseball. Every one of these has so much specific detail from every aspect, from nutrition, biomechanics, every one of them we talked about. It's just an exciting journey. And we never want you to forget that an exercise scientist is behind it, right? But do you have a time on this one?
No, we got 3 more minutes, but one piece I wanted to bring up though, as we're talking, is like, Martin's been doing this over 30 years, right? I've been a dietitian for 20 years. And so over 50 years of experience. But I think another good principle that's kind of coming to light is we're both lifelong learners, and him and I are constantly talking about new ideas and new concepts. So that's another thing, is you progress, is never get stagnant, right? Jim's been doing this quite some time, and we're already talking about things we're going to change for the next event. And so I think that's a really important lesson to show. We've been doing this a while, but we're not going to rest on our laurels. We're always looking at the research. We're always looking at the science, and we're always trying to get better. So even once you get that degree from Lionel, once you graduate, you go out there, study like you're still a student, right? You should be reading the most recent literature, looking at those books, talking to peers, going to conferences, keep increasing your education because it's constantly evolving.
Well, and another great lesson from the martial arts, when I got my black belt in judo, our sensei, he just had to make sure, because he said, man, sometimes you Americans, you have this ideal with the black belt, like that was the end, right? And maybe we think the same thing. Oh, I got my degree. It's the end. I'm done learning. And what he said is, no, in Japan, what everybody understands is the black belt. When you get that, that means it's just the beginning, right? And I think that's true of our degree. That's true of anything that you achieve. Yeah, the minute you stop learning, you're going backwards. And hey, and in the fight game, you just can't have it. And you'll always see that. The fighter that never evolves, the fighter that never changes, in particular, like, hey, Jim's last fight, he was up against new world jujitsu, and he had to continue to study that and learn that. And by doing that, he was not submitted in moves that most people would have been submitted on, right? So everybody, I guess the lesson is you're always growing, but our field is always changing, which also makes it super exciting.
Yes, always changing, wearables, different technologies, AI being introduced into all this. So you got to stay up on it. We are coming up on our half hour of power, so we will close it out. Chancellor, any closing thoughts?
If you like that one, give us some comments. Share what you thought. We want to hear what you want to hear about more, because we got so much information, but we always want to make this happen. So, hey, I'm going to be signing this one off. Another great Roar session from me, the Chancellor, Martin Rooney, and signing off for Nick Barringer, Chief Academic Officer. We are signing off, and we will see you the next time we go into the Roar.